he makes the piece OP, ORP. Maybe not. Maybe coming to this. Makes the fast. Everyone is a pacing. This is the case of you might this some is a good metric for a carbon khatas. A carbon khatas you to that is type of person who brings a carbon khatas home. Most is obviously who does exclude? Who does exclude? Amar. There it is. They don't bring a carbon on. It's to our keystone. So I said, mash. Wow. That is called 51. No. Percent. If on one mission, even though you don't need all of it. Because right, and some about me. Amazing. Incredible. The base thing. Okay. Finish. All right, let's try that again. Good morning, Rabosai. A great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to begin with Seches Harios with the right Gemara this time. With all of you, begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir to thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tilsim Shlach of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the shir and drashos this year's Yizuchus, V'soros Tavos for Am Yisrael, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul Haba Aleinu L'Tova Ben Goldberg, for an aliyah for the neshamas of his parents, Avram ben Asher Pinchas, Fegares, and his mother Fegares Bas Zelik, and hopes that all the tefillos of our Kila, Meretz Hashem, and all of Klal Yisrael answered during this month and months ahead. Shmuley Dinovitz, Le'ilu Nishmas, by Ari Flum, David Flum's father, Rabbi Yitzchak, Aryeh Ben Achaver, Rabbi Yaakov, Zichron Levracha, and our week of learning sponsor, David Goodman, Le'ilu Nishmas, Roy Ben Aryeh, Zichron Levracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Nisham Sad and Aliyah, the families, and all those who need a refuah, Shabbat, Kol Cholei Yisrael, for the Shvarach, we should merit Hashem bring home our hostages, Shalom and Bekarov. Let's say with that, let us begin. So Mazel Tov, first of all, Masech Savol Zara. Again, Mazel Tov. What an accomplishment, so exciting. Baruch Hashem, and now we come to Maseches Hariyos. Maseches Hariyos, for those of you who are Daf Yomi veterans already, so you've seen it. And again, a very interesting, different kind of Masechta, as we will see. For those of you who haven't seen it, get ready, because it's exciting, it's fantastic, it's beautiful, it's incredible. Structured a little bit differently than some of the other Masechtas that we have seen. But Emir Hashem will expose us to a lot of really wonderful and incredible areas of halacha that perhaps we have not seen and not experienced up until now. So let us begin. Mishnah Beis Amud Aleph. Horu Beis Din La'avo Al Achas Min Kol Mitzvos Ha'amuros B'Torah. Also the daf and mar a little bit bigger, as you may have picked up already. But again, it'll flow. It'll flow. Emir Hashem. Horu Beis Din La'avo Al Achas Min Kol Mitzvos Ha'amuros B'Torah. So here's the case, and this is going to be the central case that we are going to be preoccupied with, at least for today and a bit of tomorrow. Beis Din Paskin, and Beis Din made a mistake. And as a result of their mistake, ultimately, again, and they Paskin as something that was Asr, really was Mutter. That was the mistake that they made. As a result, an individual went ahead and acted with this guidance, and therefore committed an Aveira. Take a look at the first Rashi and the Daf. Horu Beis Din. In a simple case, based in Paskin, that chelev, right, forbidden fat, or dam is mutter, or blood is mutter for consumption. Based in made a mistake, right? Also remember again, the notion of human infallibility is not one that exists within Judaism. Other religions have that concept. Judaism does not have that concept, which is why the Mefarshim bring down Torah goes out of its way multiple times to repeat the sin of Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? You ever wondered to yourself, no, Moshe Rabbeinu sinned. You got it. You commit an Aveira. One Aveira. Most of us have done more Aveiras. The Torah repeats it over and over and over again. Why? Literally, again, to dismiss and to go ahead and reject the notion of human infallibility. No matter how great the person is, they still make mistakes. Even Beis Din makes mistakes. So Beis Din Paskin, and let's just use Rashi's example, they went ahead and they said that chelev is mutter, or blood is mutter. Now what happened? An individual called Ruvain heard the psak of the Beis Din, and he said, I always wanted to eat blood. So he goes ahead and he goes out and he has dam. Okay, he drinks blood. So we'll say, now what's the halacha? So again, now he committed. Now, we'll say, remember, as far as Reuben is concerned, Reuben is just acting on the advice of the psak of the Beis Din. So now the Gemara's Mishnah gives a couple of variations. Bein sha'asu va'asim b'hem. Whether we're talking about a case where Beis Din also ate blood together with Reuben, so they also made a mistake. Bein sha'asu va'asu acharehem. Whether Beis Din did it and Reuben committed the act afterwards. Bein shelo asu va'asu, or whether Beis Din didn't follow their psak at all. Just Reuven went ahead and followed it. What's the halacha? Now, we'll say, normally, if you ate blood or you ate chelev, maybe we'll use chelev as a better example, right? If you ate chelev, shogig, what's the halacha? Carbon chatos, sin offering. Again, we'll get into a little bit more of the mechanics of the kabbalos and Meretz Hashem. But you go ahead and you would normally go ahead and bring a chatos. That's the halacha. In this case over here, what the Mishnah is introducing us to is pater. Reuven does not have to bring a chatos. Why doesn't Reuven have to bring a chatos if they should tell him a Beis Din? Because Reuven did not act of his own volition. Now, of course, he acted of his own volition. He made the choice. But again, he acted based on the psak of Beis Din. And stam, a person has no reason to believe that the psak of Beis Din is flawed, and therefore halacha l'maisa he's potter from the chatos. Incredible. So as I said, that this is what the Mishnah ultimately again is introducing us to. Beis Din goes ahead, and if you look at Rashi Balei Potter, Rashi says it's the first of the short lines in Rashi. Melahavi kispo sira holil v'talav the Beis Din va'asaf here. So the Mishnah is introducing us to this concept that if Beis Din delivers an erroneous ruling, an individual acts upon that ruling, the individual is protected or absolved from personal liability. Ruben doesn't have to bring a chatos when he ate the chila based on the instruction of Beis Din. Now, Beis Din's liability, different discussion. Right now we're looking for Ruben. Okay, that's case one. Now watch this. Horu Beis Din v'yada echamen shato. Let's say same case. Beis Din paskin that chaylev is mutter, right? Forbidden fat is mutter. One of the members of the Beis Din realized this. No, this is a mistake. Now again, I will say obviously that individual who realized this was in a minority, right? He was in a minority, so the majority still carried the decision. But one of the dissenting judges realized this is an erroneous, or for that matter, again, it was another Talmid Chacham, not a member of the Beis Din, but a Talmid Chacham who was knowledgeable. The psak is wrong. Now what happens? But nevertheless, this is this. I was supposed to imagine the fact, right? Because hey, why not? Right? This this is my one shot at chiluf, right? In my Jewish life, right? Beis Din went ahead and paskin that it was mutter. I know that psak is wrong. So remember again, the individual here is very important. This is either a member of the Beis Din or ranking Talmid Chacham. So they know, this person knows the psak is wrong, but he figures, why not? Beis Din went ahead and said that it's mutter. In that case, the Mishnah says, whether Beis Din actually ate the chaylev and this guy went ahead and ate with them, or Beis Din ate the chaylev and he consumed it afterwards, or Beis Din didn't do it at all. But he decided to follow the psak of Beis Din, harei zeh chayiv. So interestingly enough, this individual is going to be chayiv, right? Which makes sense. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, he knows better, right? He knows that this is an erroneous psak, and therefore halacha l'maisa, he is going to be chayiv. Now, both interestingly enough, the Gemara is going to discuss. Sounds like a very strange case. If he knows that the psak is wrong, and he does it anyway, so of course he's going to be liable. There has to be more to the case, which we will discuss in the Gemara. Next, why the Gemara says Shel tell him a basin? Why? Because at the end of the day, when are you shielded from personal liability? When you could say that I did what I did based on the psak of Beis Din. But if you know that the psak of Beis Din is wrong, and you follow it anyway, at the end of the day, you are not shielded from personal liability. Exactly. We'll say this is the rule, says the Mishnah. Hatola biatzmo chayiv, hatola bebeis din pater. If one acts of their own volition, ultimately again they're chayiv. Now we'll say, remember again, if one eats chilin k'mizid, what's your liability? Right? You chayiv malchus, really, right? Because remember, you're not going to get it. You can't bring a chatas because chatas is only brought for shogeg. Right? So the mezid is no chatas. Only the shogeg is chatas. So that's why we're going to have to define what this case is over here. Because in order to say chayiv b'pashas means chatas must mean that there's some element of shogeg. So what's the shogeg in this case? Again, we'll have to see in the Gemara. But bottom line, what the Mishnah is introducing us to is that Beis Din issues an erroneous psak, and an individual follows that psak. The individual is shielded from personal liability of achatas because they acted in good faith. If Beis Din issued a wrongful psak, and the individual knows that it's a wrong psak, again, I will say, by the way, if you notice, by the way, it has to be a certain kind of individual who knows that it's an erroneous psak, right? Not someone who thinks that they know. But rather, again, we're talking about someone over here, either who is a member of the Beis Din himself or a ranking Talmid Chacham. That person knows the psak is wrong, but he follows it anyway, he is not shielded from personal liability. Okay, so we'll say that's the Mishnah. Let's delve in. We'll say Mazel Tov. Our first Mishnah in Paris. Our first Mishnah in Paris. Incredible. Incredible. Amar Shmuel. Yolam. All right, salvation going. Amar Shmuel. Yolam ain't based in Chayavin Ad Shemel Had Mutar Machlokas. So I'll say, so now, we see Machlokes, Rav Shmuel and Rav Dini, a little bit just about the mechanics of this. So now, I understand is what exactly does Beis Din have to say when they deliver this erroneous ruling? So again, Amar Shmuel, the old one in Beis Din Chayavin Ad Shemel Had Mutar Machlokas. So Shmuel says the verbiage is Beis Din says Mutar Machlokas. This is permitted to you. You are permitted to eat chaylev. They have to say it like that. Okay. What's the one word? Lasos. You are permitted to act on this psak. So Rabbi says, saying that it's mutar is not enough. In order for the individual to be shielded from personal liability because they act based on the psak of Beis Din, Beis Din must have also added in the word lasos. You are permitted to go ahead and behave based on this psak. You're permitted to act based on this psak. It's very interesting. You must see my time up. Now, what's the reason for that? Why does the Din add in that word lasos? So the Din says because without lasos, but there's no mandate or there's no direction from Beis Din that you're allowed to act based on this. So therefore, Rabbi requires the word lasos in order for this to be like instruction from Beis Din, which would then mean if Beis Din says, mutar, right, chaylev is mutar atam lasos. You're permitted to go ahead and eat chaylev. Or mutar atam lechol. Right, you're allowed to go ahead and eat. Okay, so then Beis Din is paskening and they're giving hora, they're giving instruction. Rabbi says, halacha l'maisa, that's where if the individual acted on that Beis Din's advice, that Beis Din's psak, ultimately again, the individual would be pater. But according to Rabbi, if Beis Din would just say, mutar matan, it's mutar, that would not shield the individual from personal liability. Shmuel says, yes, it would. Okay, so let's analyze this. So my time again, what's Rabbi's logic? If they show Yigmara Hora, because Beis Din's psak is only final when number one they tell you status and action. When they tell you it's mutter and you can in fact behave based on this psak, ultimately again that's when Beis Din's psak is complete. So let's analyze this. Good. Fine. So what's another else to point out? Rashi's on both sides over here. So we're gonna right now it's on the right side, but it's on both sides. From Rabbi. Rabbi says you also now say Rabbi is coming along to support ultimately again Rabbi's position. We also learn this. Chazal Yiro, so we're gonna get a lot thrown at us today. We'll say this is the case of Zakin Mamre. Zakin Mamre is an individual who is a member of the Beis Din who refuses to yield to the majority. Take a quick look at Rashi for just a moment. Chazar Rashi says, Zakin Mamre Le'iro, Hora Lasos, the mashma become a mutar atam lasos. So before we get that, so Zakin Mamre is literally again someone who is outnumbered on the Beis Din, but refuses to yield to the majority. So we'll say, so such an individual actually can be executed for this transgression, which makes sense because if you refuse to yield to the majority, you're undermining the fundamental fabric of the way the judicial system works. That's how a Beis Din works. It works on the majority. So again, I'm not buying it. I must ignore again back to our Marcus days. Remember Marcus? And so remember, the Gemara said that even after Beis Din delivers a verdict, the judges in the minority can't go over to the retirement and say, no, this is good, I just want to let you go. I really did. What did I do? I was in the minority. You can't do that. You can't do that. You're part of a Beis Din. Once the majority decides on something, that's the psak, and everyone is in. So Zakin Mamre refuses to yield to the majority. So watch this. Chazal Yiro, just in the second Mamre, goes back to his town. Shana, he continues to teach, and he continues to advance the psak that he held before. Pater, ultimately again, he's pater. Now, we'll say, so in other words, if he comes back to his town and he continues to go ahead and discuss the psak and teach the psak as he believes it, not in line with the way the Bezdin is doing it, he's patur. You don't execute him. However, hora lasos, but if he paskins and he says hevra, you can act on this psak, then chayiv. What do you see from here? That for Bezdin to give a binding psak, it's not just enough to say mutarin atem, but rather what do they have to say? Mutarin atem lasos. Bezdin's psak, the formal psak, they have to give first of all again the psak halacha, and then explicitly indicate you can act based on this halacha. So let's just remember again, why is this important for us? Our whole discussion is an individual is acting based on the psak of Bezdin, which turns out to be erroneous. So now we're saying, okay, you acted in good faith, you're shielded from personal liability. Rav Dimi is saying, but it only works if the psak was literally articulated. That's part one, mutter, and number two, from this point. I'm Rabbi Abba. Yeah, said, I've been on all the terrible cases. We see one of the exciting things I was saying. When we remember everything, sometimes we see things. It's kind of like seeing somewhere in shul where I know you. So I know you too well to ask you your name again, right? But I don't know you. But like, there's that feeling of like, of course we know each other. What's your name? I have no idea. But so that feeling is a lot like that. Like in other words, like I see something, and I'm like, I know you. I don't know your name, right? I don't really remember the details, but I definitely know you. There's a beautiful feeling like that. So again, the Gemara says like this: Horla Bezdin, do nothing. So we've seen this case. Right, Rachel's married to Reuven. Reuven goes overseas. Eid Echad comes along and says Reuven is dead. So remember again, one of the unique halachas, one of the unique situations in halacha where we believe in Eid Echad. Right, we believe in Eid Echad to allow women to be married. Remember, again, we've seen this. This is a kula. This is a heter for what purpose? Remember again, what? Excellent. You should iguna akilu barab. Menachem said it first. He said it. I just want to go on that guy. Right, so the nice right? So again, listen, now watch this. So whole of Bezdin living nothing. So let's say Bezdin got the Eid Echad, and they passed it. Okay, Rachel, you can get remarried. Let's watch this. The whole of the kilkala, and she went out and she had other relationships. She didn't get married. She had relationships with other men outside of marriage. Okay, now what happens? I must say, now remember, and then what occurred? Guess who came back? Reuven. Right? Reuven came home. So now both sides see now what's her status? So what's the halacha? Chayeves b'karban. Ultimately, again, she is chayeves. Now again, not chayev nisa, not that called for adultery, but she is chayeves b'karban. Now why? Watch this. Shelo v'tiru la ela l'hinase. Because remember again, what was the psak of Bezdin? The psak of Bezdin was that Allah said, what? You're allowed to what? You're allowed to remarry. You're not allowed to engage in immoral behavior. So interestingly enough, had she remarried and Reuven came back, ultimately again she wouldn't have any personal liability. Now she engaged in immoral behavior, there is personal liability. But bottom line, why are we bringing this down over here? If you notice, what's the psak? How does Bezdin formulate the psak? Bezdin says ultimately again. Bezdin says, Horla Bezdin Lichinase. So if you notice again, what's the formulation of the psak of Bezdin? Bezdin doesn't just say mutter. Bezdin says mutter and behavior. You are permitted to remarry. So again, remember, all of this is backing up Rabbi's position that the way a psak of Bezdin is formalized is mutter la'asos. You're allowed to, and here's the accompanying action. I'm Ravina. We also learn this. So we'll say, so again, this is actually very interesting. If you look at actually Holu Bezdin Lavar, it's almost right across from Rashi on the right. Holu Bezdin Lavar, the Mashma Holu Bezdin Lasos, the Ina Gemura, Hora Asam Achiyomu Mutarm Atam Lasos. So they'll say, so again, we also learn this. What does it mean? Holu Bezdin Lavar. It's our Mishnah. So if you notice, what's the Lashon of the Mishnah? Beis Din paskin la'avar. La'avar means what? Beis Din says something is mutter, and they said you can go ahead and do it as well. So all of this backs up Rav Dimi's version. This is all Rabbi is doing all this. So back up Rav Dimi's version that when a Beis Din gives a psak, there's two parts of the psak. There's mutter, and you're allowed to act, or act in a certain way based on this. And then, if Beis Din's ruling was erroneous, and an individual acted upon that, halacha l'maisa, they are shielded ultimately again from any personal liability. Which the Gemara says, Sulo Midu, and there's nothing more to talk about. So we just have this, right? This is the Talmudic equivalent of the mic drop, right? That's it. Right? It's done. We're done over here. Nothing more to talk about. Now, what's interestingly enough, there's an alternate version, an opposite version of this discussion. So Amar Shmuel, in Deisha Chayavin Achshemula and Mutarim Atem Lasos. Shmuel will say now again. The positions of Shmuel and Rav Dimi are going to be exactly the same. Shmuel says that the formulation of the Beis Din is all Beis Din needs to say is Mutarim Atam Lasos. Right, so this is Shmuel. I'm sorry. A reverse attribution. In this version, Shmuel is the one who says that the lashon of the psak of the Beis Din is Mutarim Atam Lasos. Shmuel has the one who has the mandate to put in the Lasos. Rav Dimi and Arda Amar Afidu. No, even if Beis Din just says it's mutar nigmara hora. That's the end of the psak, and Allah once again, if the individual acted based on that, they would be shielded from personal liability. I'm Rabbi. So what's this? So now in this version, Abaye is asking a series of questions on Rav Dimi. In the previous version, Abaye was supporting Rav Dimi. In this version, he's questioning Rav Dimi, bringing all of the same truths. I'm Abaye. That's not how we learn. Right? Chazer li'iro l'shana olimim k'derech shamim le'pater or la'asos chayik. Zaki Mamre. Again, we don't have to go through all the cases again. But Rabbi says Zaki Mamre. Zaki Mamre is only going to be chayik when, not if he just teaches the halacha, but if he tells the people this is the halacha and you can act on it, that's when he's chayik. What do you see from here? That it's not just enough to say mutter, you also need what? La'asos. Next, from Rabbi Yawa, v'halotzinan. Rabbi Yawa says 1 second. What about the v'halotzinan horu? About v'halotzinan hafi. Horu la beizin linase. Ve'ocha v'kilkala hayavis karban. So tira elinase. In the case, Beis Din gives instruction to women to remarry. Their psak is only binding if what if they say mutter and action. So you see from here, Beis Din's psak requires mutter and lasos. Next, Amravino, v'halot tzara. Can I finish this for a second? Horu Beis Din la v'achas nikolas amurav Torah. Right, our Mishnah. But clearly the verbiage of the Mishnah is Beis Din is saying this something is mutter, and they're telling you ultimately again that halacha ma'aseh you could act on it, and you are says su lo. So interestingly enough, both versions, although again there's reverse attribution, halacha ma'aseh really come out the same way. Let's just go with the first version. Halacha l'maisa, the way we pass things, is like Rav Dimi. And therefore, again, just to understand, the way that Beis Din would normally go ahead and structure their psak is they would say, mutter, number one, again, they're ruling that instructions, that this psak, behaviorally, that if someone follows, even though it turns out to be an erroneous psak, halacha l'maisa, they are shielded from personal liability. Incredible. Great. That's our first part of the psak. Shogig apiyam. Remember again, what happened was just now part one. Part one is, let's just plug this into mutter le'echol. So now okay. So now the individual went ahead and ate chela. Based on Sakhin Beis Din, so what says? So now it says, the individual went ahead and acted inadvertently based on their psak. The Gemara says, why do you use that word shogeg? Or as we'll say, if you think about it, interestingly enough, he's not really shogeg. In other words, right? Ruvain is acting intentionally. Why is he acting intentionally? Because as far as Ruvain is concerned, he's got a psak Beis Din that says what he's doing is mutter. It turns out that it was an accident, but why we're bothered by it? Why don't you say Al Pihem. The individual came along and acted based on their word. Why do you need the word shogeg? Which means Rabbi shogeg lasu. Listen to this. This is very interesting. Rabbi says because the word shogeg actually comes from three different cases. This is really quite fascinating. Lasu, watch this. Based in Shechel Motor. Get ready. Based in Paskin, Chilib is Motor. Okay, now what happened? So get ready for this. Basin, part one of the story. Basin went ahead and said that Chilib is Motor. Okay, next, part two. One is Shuman. Shuman is permitted fat. Ruvain, his intention is to eat the Shuman. But what happens? He gets mixed up and he eats the Chilib. So Ruvain, watch this. So Ruvain ate Caleb. But Reuven didn't really eat Caleb because of the psak of Basin. Right? Reuven ate Caleb because he just got confused. Comes along Rabbi, and Rabbi says, get ready for this, get ready for it, Reuven is pater. Reuven is pater. Why? Listen to this. Because essentially, since there's a psak Basin out there, that says that Caleb is in Putter, if a Jew ends up eating Caleb inadvertently either because he's following the psak of the Beis Din, right, or because he just gets mixed up, he's Putter. Both sides, and that's wild. That's wild, right? Because remember again, in this case, Reuven's Caleb consumption has nothing to do with the psak of the Beis Din. It has to do with his own personalistic confusion. But yet, again, he's still going to be Putter because that psak is out there in the world. Incredible. So the let's go. Amrav showed you last night. Horu Beis Shechel Mutter. Beis when it said Caleb is Mutter, it is Caleb b'Shuman. And then Reuven mixed up a piece of Caleb with a piece of Shuman, and inadvertently ended up eating Shuman ba'achlo Putter. Putter ultimately again he's Putter. Al pihem mamish. So we'll say this is very interesting. So essentially, according to Rava, there's two different cases embedded in the Mishnah, right? Because listen how the Mishnah reads. So there's two different events. There's shogeg and there's al pihem. Al pihem is the case that we've been talking about up until now, which is Beis Din said that Caleb is mutter lechol. Reuven goes and eats Caleb. Okay, he's absolved from personal liability. And then the case of shogeg is actually a different case. Rabbi wants to posit. The case of shogeg is again he gets mixed up between his Caleb and his Shuman. He eats the Caleb. He didn't mean to. He's still going to be Potter ultimately again because such a psak from Basin exists in the world. Incredible, absolutely incredible. So the Gemara says, the others say, Rabbi says, shogeg al pihem muter Potter. An alternate version of Rabba, or an opposite version of Rabba, shogeg al pihem. It's only an accidental commission of the Avera that happens as a result of the psak that absolves Reuven of personal liability. First part I will say, Aval nischali lo Caleb b'shumah v'achol chayi. So halacha l'maisa, Reuven just gets mixed up between his pieces. Right then, halacha l'maisa, he will be liable. So the Gemara says, Milsa the Pshita, again, just two versions of Rabba over here. So the Gemara says, Milsa the Pshita le Rabba coming by the Rambam Bachama. So something which was obvious to Rabba was actually a Kasher Bachama. The Rambam Bachama goes the second wide line, Holy Beis Din, Shechel Mutter. So Beis Din Paskin, same case also. Beis Din Paskin that Caleb is Mutter. Then it's Chaliv lo b'Shuman. But then again, Reuven had two pieces of meat in his house. One was Caleb, one was Shuman. His intention was to eat the Shuman. He accidentally went and ate the Caleb. What's the halacha? So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. What's the halacha? On the Rava says, Tashma, if Reuven went ahead and acted accidentally based on the psak of the Beis Din, the Gemara says, Shogeg al pihem lamali. So Rava says, why do you need that lashon of Shogeg al pihem? Just say pihem, al pihem, that's it. Lasuye, horu Beis Din shechil mutter, chalik lo chilib b'shuman ba'achli. Potter, ultimately, again, in order to include this case, where again, Reuven got mixed up between the pieces, he ended up eating he's still going to be potter. Ultimately, he's still covered, so to speak, under the psak of Beis Din. The Gemara says, 1 second. Zilma shogig al pi with the potter. Avam is chalifo chaylev b'shur ba'achol chayv. Maybe not. Maybe Reuben is only potter when he mamish acts another mistake. Who says that he should be potter based on that? The alternate version of this, Amarava, Tashma, Halach Yachid, Ba'asa Shogig Apihem. So if an individual, Reuben went ahead and acted the Shogig based on the psak of Beis Din, so the Gemara says, My lab, Shogig Apihem with the potter. Isn't it only in the case where Reuben mamish acts based on the psak of the Beis Din that he's going to be potter? But if halacha l'maisa, he mixes up the pieces that with the psak of the Beis Din, he just has a mix up in his own house that he should be chayiv. Yilma o shogeg o api. Maybe not. Maybe halacha l'maisa again. That's what the Mishnah is coming to say. There's really one of two pieces. There's shogeg or alpi. Ultimately, alpiya means he literally acts based on the psak of the Beis Din. And shogeg means he has his own mix up at home. Incredible. So I just want to point that over here. So this is really fascinating, right? Everyone is agreeing that if Beis Din passes, it is permitted to eat chaylev, right? Mutter atam le'achol chaylev. All right, mutter and go le'achol chaylev. So everyone agrees if Reuben acts on that psak, he's going to be potter. He's going to be potter. The shaila just is if now Reuben has a mix-up in his home, two pieces chaylev and shuman. He wanted to eat the shuman. He accidentally eats the chaylev. Is he chayiv or potter? So this is the machlokes. What opinion will say is chayiv? His inadvertent consumption of chaylev has nothing to do with the psak of the Beis Din. Other version says no, he's going to be potter because once there's a psak of the Beis Din out there in the veld, right, that chaylev is mutter, ultimately again he's going to be covered by that. Incredible. The Gemara says before shop. In reality, this is part of a bigger machlokes. Holu Beis Din shechaylev machlokes. Holu Beis Din shechaylev mutter. Beis Din paskin that chaylev is mutter. Okay, that's our case. And now both sides. That's part one. Part two. Reuben is in his house. Reuben has two pieces of meat. One is chaylev and one is shuman. When it's chalifo chaylev is shuman, ba'aslo, he mixes up the pieces and inadvertently ends up consuming the chaylev. What's the halacha? Rav Amar Potter, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chai. Okay, here it is. Here it is. So explicit machlokes. Rav says you're potter, you're covered under the psak of the Beis Din. Rabbi Yochanan says no, your act has nothing to do with the psak of the Beis Din, and therefore you're going to be chayiv. By the way, chayiv what? Chayiv chatas. Because remember again, this is still a case of shogeg. This is still a case of shogeg. But so there's a nice day. The Gemara is the kasha. Me'am haaretz, me'am haaretz ba'asosa. Someone says so. Ultimately, this is the nefesh achas kachat b'shkaga. Me'am haaretz ba'asosa achas mitzvos Hashem asher lo te'asena ba'Hashem. This is the pasuk by Kabbalah Chatos. Right, the person commits an avera inadvertently. So the Gemara says me'am haaretz ba'asosa fat l'mumar. This comes to exclude a mumar. Remember again, the concept of katos is totally predicated on the notion of shogeg. A mumar, which is someone again, so we saw back to our Sanhedrin days. A mumar is someone who fundamentally rejects Torah, rejects Torah. So ultimately, and sins with intentionality, ultimately again is exempt from the carbon katos. Doesn't mean a katos. Mishra ben Yossi Omer, Mishra Eno Tzarech. Omer Asher Lo Te'asena Bishkaga Va'Ashem Ohoda. So what's this very interesting? When the Torah speaks about again a carbon katos, what does it say? Asher Lo Te'asena Bishkaga Va'Ashem Ohoda. Talking about a person ultimately again when you bring a carbon katos, Hashav, here's the good metric for a carbon katos. A carbon katos you bring for an inadvertent avera. Meaning what? Here's the litmus test. If you had the necessary information at hand, would you have abstained from sin? If the answer to that is yes, then you bring a carbon katos for an inadvertent commission of the avera. That's what we call hashav mi'ediyaso. If someone would have refrained from sinning, maybe carbon al shididasa. That's the type of person who brings a carbon katos ultimately again for the inadvertent sin. Conversely, if someone had the knowledge but still would have sinned, they don't bring a carbon chatas. Moses obviously would this exclude? Amamar, lo shami yasal. If somebody would not refrain from or abstain from sinning because of this awareness, they don't bring a carbon on their shoulder. So that would exclude Amamar. Then Isa, ha lo shav yasal. Now, was it interestingly enough, applying this to our case over here, and applying this to our case, so the Pashtus, our case is not a situation where one would have refrained even had they known, right? Remember again, Reuben is getting mixed up between the pieces. Even had Reuben known that the piece he was about to consume was Caleb, he still wouldn't have abstained. Why would he have not abstained? Why not? There was a psak bezin. So a second. So why should you be chai b'chatas in this case? In other words, we'll say the metric for chatas is I bring a carbon chatas for committing an avera b'shogeg. If I would not have committed the avera had I had the knowledge, but in this case again, even if someone Reuben, wait, it's Caleb. Reuben has said, so what? So what? Bezin said that it's mutter. So why should we have a carbon chatas in this case? Incredible. Let me so. Amra Papa Kasar Rabbi Yochanan, Kevan Dechimis Yada Lahu Lebeidina Hadri Lahu. Because again, so really what it says is like this: since when Bezdin finds out that their psak is erroneous, obviously Bezdin is going to watch it back. Hadar is the Gemara says Vahu Nami Hadarei, and then when Reuben hears that Bezdin retracted their psak, obviously again he's also going to retract his behavior. So therefore the Gemara says Shami Yaso Kamiyambe. So essentially the Gemara says is like this: we still call this a case where if he had the knowledge he would have abstained. In this case it's just two steps removed. Had Bezin found out that their psak is erroneous, they would have abstained from this behavior, and then when Reuven finds out that the psak of Bezin is erroneous, he would have abstained. Therefore this is called the case where if one had the knowledge he would have abstained. That's why at least one opinion says he is chayav b'chatas in this case. Amra Papa. I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll say now. Okay, this is now another topic over here. So I'll say which we're going to get into. There's something in this case that we're dealing with up until now. What's happening in this case is Basin is giving a erroneous psak, and is following through on. There's going to be another case which Basin delivers an erroneous psak, and the majority follows the psak. That's a different situation. That is called par he'elam davar min hatzibur, a special carbon that's brought. Now, in order to bring that carbon, you need 51% of the plow to go ahead and follow. So we'll say, watch this. Let's say you have 50% of Klal Yisrael, and who is the determinant, right? Who is the guy who's going to tip the scales? It's Reuben. Right, so again, watch this. So based on asking Chilul is mutter. 50% of Klal Yisrael. Reuben. What does Reuben do? All eyes on Reuben. Reuben's sitting at home. He's got two pieces in front of him, Caleb and Shimon, right? And he needs to agree that Reuben does not count towards the total. Right? Reuben does not count towards the total. Why? Now, why is that? Because deep down, what you can't ignore is that Reuben is not actually based on the psak of the base. Reuben is just doing his own thing. So even if we can say that Reuben is personal liability, or Reuben is himself in personal liability because of the psak of the base, let's say for calculating the 51% for Par Helam Davar Min Hatzibur, you can't say that Reuben is actually based on the psak of the base. Okay. And my time was the reason Bishgaga. Because for Par Helam Davar Min Hatzibur, for that 51%, everyone has to be acting in the same shogeg capacity. Therefore, again, Reuben is acting in a different shogeg capacity, and he can't be counted. Again, separate halacha. So let's say, so bottom line, interestingly enough, what we end off with over here is a fundamental machlokes. And what is that fundamental machlokes? Halacha l'maisa. If Reuben went ahead and ended up eating Caleb, not because of the psak of the basin, but because he got confused himself, halacha l'maisa, is he liable or not? On one hand, one opinion says liability because big consumption has nothing to do with the psak of the Beis Din. On the other hand, there is in the belt, right, in the world, there is a psak of Beis Din that says Caleb is mutter. Does that psak absolve him or not? Fundamental mutter. We'll see the Rambam on that. Next. Beisha asu va'asiman. Lamali the mistakaran. So let's say again. The Mishnah brought whether he did it together with Beis Din. Beis Din did it first, and then he did it. Then Beis Din he did it by himself. So again, I understand the Mishnah why lozu afsu katani. So we'll say lozu afsu is a stylistic version of the Mishnah, but the Mishnah sometimes just includes a lot of information, even though you don't need to say all of it. It's understood. Ella Seifa, if you about it, but the end of the Mishnah is coming to highlight liability. What are all the cases? Well, the cases should really be framed in the reverse. So they'll say on the base, to which Gemara says zu bein tzarech lamar zu katani. So again, another stylistic idea that sometimes the Mishnah will say this even though I didn't need to say something else. Bottom line, there is additional information listed in the Mishnah, which is just the stylistic reality of the Mishnah. Sometimes again, even though I can extrapolate the cases from each other, so it's interesting. Sometimes the Mishnah will rely on me to extrapolate, and sometimes the Mishnah will just give a lot of additional information. Fine. The other Achaman, case of Asamar again. What was that? That's case of Mishnah. Beis Din delivers the erroneous psak. You're allowed to eat Caleb. One of the members of the Beis Din, or a ranking Tam Chacham, in the galley of the Beis Din, realizes that this is an erroneous psak, but he nevertheless relies on it and eats Caleb. What's the halacha? He's chayav. Ultimately, again, this individual ultimately again is going to be chayav. He says the Gemara, watch this. Let's say, if you notice, by the way, how do the Mishnah refer to these individuals? Either, right, Talmid Chacham, interesting. Person is a Talmid Chacham and fit to deliver judgment. Why do you need both of those things? The Gemara says, "Tarti lamali, Amarava Ichtir Sadai Tamina Hani Mili Gomer V'Sava." I would have thought about it that the only type of person who is not allowed to rely on the psak of the Beis Din Yisrael, someone who is Gomer means learned, and Savir, Rashi says, Megan Gabar Mitol Gabar. Someone is able to extrapolate and ultimately, again, apply knowledge to different things. In other words, maybe we're only talking about someone who really is fit to be a diet. Aval, Gomer Velo Savir, but if someone has a lot of knowledge but they don't know how to extrapolate, well, whereas maybe you got to have both of these qualities in order to be exempt from personal liability. Rabbi says, come here, Well, it's not true because the Mishnah itself says, Roi Lahora. Who is a person who is Roi Lahora? A person who is both Gamir, learned, and Savir, knows how to extrapolate information and apply it one scenario to another. It's not the same. If we would have just said raw, how about Gamir v'Savir? I would have thought like this. It's only someone who's both Gamir and Savir. About Gamir v'Savir, low. But perhaps if you don't have both of these qualities, maybe you would be exempt from personal liability if you rely on the Beis Din. Tana Roi Ra. The Mishnah is said he was Gomer v'lo Savir v'lo Gomer. So what's incredible? Therefore, again, the Mishnah uses the lashon of Hora. Hora actually also has came to limit to say, as long as someone is either Gomer or Savir, you have a lot of information, or you know how to extrapolate. In other words, if you have the ability to know with certainty that this psak is wrong, and you rely on it, you are not shielded for personal liability. Incredible. So says, here's a good example of this. Right? It will be a good example of someone where if they relied on the psak of the Beis Din, they would not be shielded for personal liability. They don't know. Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zoma. Okay. Right? Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zoma. Like these individuals, I will say, if you look at Rashi says over here on the right hand side, you go Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zoma, Shayoshvin Lefnei Chachamim, Vayeru'in Lahora. These were Talmidei Chachamim who were like sit before the Dayanim. They were sitting in front of the judges in the Beis Din, and they themselves ultimately again were fit to be judges. This is the type of person the Mishnah is talking about. Amrei Abaye, Ki Agavna Meizitu. I was like, here's the problem. Okay, so let's at least begin this, and I alluded to this in the Mishnah before. Here's the problem. If you have a person like Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zoma, who obviously, again, both sides were ranking sages, and they hear the Beis Din say that Chelev is mutter. Chelev is mutter. They know it's wrong. If they go ahead and they act based on this psak that was saying, so the Mishnah said they're chayiv v'chachas, not shelev a personal liability. Why? If they act on the psak, they will say, what are they? What are they? They're amazing. They're intentional. They know it's wrong. They know it's wrong. So when you talk about coming chafas, they should actually be liable for amazing. They'll say, now watch this. This is incredible. Yeah, that's what the pasuk says. If the individual does of his own volition, he's chayiv. Ultimately, you say Torah's based on his mutter. Case on Holy based on Shekhi of mutter. If based on Haskin, Shekhi of his mutter. We're going to stop over here for today. We'll pick up. Don't worry. We're fine. We're absolutely. We're fine. Catch up in this fucking. I say good. Shkayach, everyone. Start for today. So again, stop mid discussion. But again, a lot of good stuff. We'll pick up with the Talmud Chacham case tomorrow. Shkayach, everyone. Okay, let's have a great day. I will say, Mastavan starting with Secretarius.
Yeah, and it's like you just gotta change the way you look at it, because like at the end of the day, can you sit here and confidently tell yourself like I'm a damn good comedian and no one's ever held me down? Because there's a lot.
I can truly say that too.
And you should say that.
And you know, part of it's also like we are dealing in a
all right, let's try that again. Good morning on both sides. Gracious of those.
And information.
To be able to begin with Seches Harios with the right Gemara this time. With all of you, begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, ROTHSCHILD, for dedicating all the shir and drashos this year's Yizuchus. Besoros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul Habarim was Rabbi Ben Goldberg for Naviach and Shomas of his parents, Avram Ben Asher Pinchas, Fegorez and his mother Fegorez Bas Zeli, and hopes that all the tzivos of our Kira and Hashem and all of Klal Yisrael will be answered during this month and the months ahead. Shmoni within this Eilu Nishmas by our from his father Rabbi Aryeh Ben Achoda Rabbi Yaakov Zichron Bracha, and our governing sponsors David Goodman Eilu Nishmas Roy Ben Aryeh Zichron Bracha. We'll pray all of the Nisham Zadna, the families in it, from all those who were for Shabbat to the whole Israel. We should remember to bring home our hostages, Shalom and Karov. Allow our holy soldiers to be successful. But with that, let us begin. So, Mazel Tov, first of all, the second Samuel Zara. Again, Mazel Tov, what an accomplishment, so exciting. And now we come to the second Harius. The second Harius, for those of you who are Dafyomi veterans already, so you've seen it. And again, a very interesting, different kind of Masechta, as we will see. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, it's exciting, it's fantastic, it's beautiful, it's incredible. Structured a little bit differently than some of the other Masechtas that we have seen. But in Yetz Hashem will expose us to a lot of really wonderful and incredible areas of Halacha that perhaps we have not seen and not experienced until now. So let us begin. Mishnah days on the Dawah. Holy Beis Din La'avo Al Achas Mikol Mitzvos Ta'amuros B'Torah. Also, we got them a little bit bigger, as you may have picked up already. But again, it'll flow next session. Holy Beis Din La'avo Al Achas Mikol Mitzvos Ta'amuros B'Torah. Well, so here's the case, and this is going to be the central piece that we're going to be preoccupied with, at least for today and up to tomorrow. Beis Din passed and Beis Din made a mistake, and as a result of their mistake, ultimately again, they passing as something that was Asr really was mutter. That was the mistake that they made. As a result, the individual went ahead and acted with this guidance, and therefore committed an avera. Take a look at the first Rashi on the dam. Holu Beis Din to go to Holu Shechelev Odam Mutter. Simple case. Beis Din asking that Chelev, like forbidden fat, or dam is mutter of blood, is mutter for consumption. Beis Din made a mistake. Right? Because remember again, the notion of human infallibility is not one that exists within Judaism. Other religions have that concept. Judaism does not have that concept. This is why the first bring down Torah goes out of its way multiple times to repeat the sin of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, but what do you see yourself? Moshe Rabbeinu sin. You got it. Committed an Avera. One Avera. One Avera. Most of us have done more Averas since we got here this morning. Right? That Moshe Rabbeinu did in the entire lifetime. The Torah repeats it over and over and over again. Why? Literally, again, to dismiss and to go ahead and reject the notion of human infallibility. No matter how great the person is, they still make mistakes. Even Beis Din makes mistakes. So Beis Din passed them. And let's just use Rashi's example. They went ahead and they said that Chalev is mutter. Or blood is mutter. Now what happened? What happened? An individual called Ruben heard the psak of the Beis Din. He said, I always wanted to eat blood. So he goes ahead and he goes out and he hangs down. Okay, he drinks blood. So he says, now what's the halacha? So again, so now teaching it now. Remember, as far as Ruben is concerned, Ruben is just acting on the advice of the psak of the Beis Din. So now the Gemara Mishnah gives a couple of variations. Whether we're talking about a case where Beis Din also ate blood together with Ruben, so they also made a mistake. Whether Beis Din did it and Ruben committed the act afterwards, or whether Beis Din didn't follow their psak at all, just Ruben went ahead and followed it. What's the halacha? Now, what's that? Normally, if you eat blood, or you eat chalev, if you eat chalev, show me what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Carbon katas, sin offering. Again, we'll get into a little bit more of the mechanics of the kabbalah in this. But you go ahead and you would normally go ahead and bring some katas. That's the halacha. In this case over here, what the Mishnah is introducing us to is part of Ruben does not have to bring a chatos. Why doesn't Ruben have to bring a chatos? Because Ruben did not act of his own volition. Now, of course, he acted of his own volition. He made the choice. But again, he acted based on the psak of Beis Din. And Stam, a person has no reason to believe that the psak of Beis Din is flawed. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, he's cut from the chatos. Incredible. So this is what the Mishnah ultimately again is introducing us to. Beis Din goes ahead. And if you look at Rashi, by the way, Potter, Rashi says it's the first of the short lines in Rashi. So the Mishnah is introducing us to this concept that if Beis Din delivers an erroneous ruling, an individual acts upon that ruling, the individual is protected or absolved from personal liability. Ruben doesn't have to bring a chatos when he ate the chalev based on the instruction of Beis Din. Now, Beis Din liability, different discussion. Right now we're looking for Ruben. Okay, that's case one. Now watch this. Horu Beis Din v'yada echamen shato. Let's say same case. Beis Din tells him that chalev is mutter. Right, so giving fat is mutter. One of the members of the Beis Din realized this. No, this isn't true. Now, obviously, that individual who realized this was in a minority. Right, he was in a minority, so the majority still carried the decision. But one of the dissenting judges realized that this is an erroneous psak. Or for that matter, again, there was another Tam Chacham, not a member of the Beis Din, but a Tam Chacham who was knowledgeable enough to know that halacha l'maisa, the psak is wrong. The psak is wrong. Now what happens? But nevertheless, this member of the Beis Din, or the Tam Chacham, still followed the psak. Just imagine the guy. He's like, hey, why not? Right? This is my one shot at chalev, right? In my Jewish life, right? Beis Din went ahead and asking that it was mutter. I know that psak is wrong. I know the psak is wrong. So remember again, the individual here is very important. This is either a member of the Beis Din or ranking Tam Chacham. So they know, this person knows the psak is wrong. He figures, why not? Beis Din went ahead and said that it's mutter. In that case, the Gemara said, the Mishnah says, whether Beis Din actually ate the chalev and this guy went ahead and ate with them, or Beis Din ate the chalev and he continued afterwards, or Beis Din didn't do it at all. But he decided to follow the psak of Beis Din. So interestingly enough, this individual is going to be chayiv, right? Which makes sense. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, He knows. He knows better, right? He knows that this is an erroneous psak, and therefore halacha l'maisa, he is going to be chayiv. Now, interestingly enough, the Gemara is going to discuss a very strange case. If he knows that the psak was wrong and he does it anyway, so of course he's going to be liable. There has to be more to the case, which we will discuss in the Gemara. Next, why the Gemara said Nation tell him about it? Why? Because at the end of the day, when are you shielded from personal liability? When you can say that I did what I did based on the psak of Beis. But if you know that the psak of Beis is wrong, and you follow it anyway, at the end of the day you are not shielded from personal liability. Exactly. Listen, this is the rule, says the Mishnah. Hatol b'atzmo chayiv, hatol b'beis din pater. If one acts of their own volition, ultimately again they're chayiv. They will say, now remember again, if one eats chilib beneath, what's your liability? Right? Chayiv malchus, right? Because remember, you're not going to get a chayiv. You can't bring a chayiv because this is only brought for shogeg. Right? So if you b'mezid is no chatos. Only b'shogeg is chatos. So that's why we're going to have to define what this case is over here. Because in order to say chayiv b'pashas means chatos must mean that there's some element of shogeg. So what's the shogeg in this case? Again, we'll have to see in the Gemara. But bottom line, what Mitch is introducing us to is that based on issues of erroneous psak, and an individual follows that psak, the individual is shielded from personal liability of a chatos because they acted in good faith. If Beis Din issued a wrongful psak, and the individual knows that it's a wrong psak, again, I will say, by the way, if you notice, by the way, it has to be a certain kind of individual who knows that it's an erroneous psak, right? Not someone who thinks that they know, but rather, again, we're talking about someone who is a member of the Beis Din himself, or a rank who's come chacham. That person knows the psak is wrong, but he follows it anyway. He is not shielded from personal liability. Okay, so we'll say that's the Mishnah. Let's delve in. Let's say Mazel Tov. First Mishnah Harius. Incredible. Amar Shmuel. Yolam. Salvation is over. Amar Shmuel. Yolam. Ein Beis Din chayavin ad shemal had mutar matem. So I'll say now. We see Machlokas Shmuel and Rav Dini a little bit just about the mechanics of this. So now I understand the principle. Like the principle I understand. So now the shaila is what exactly does Beis Din have to say when they deliver this erroneous ruling? So again, Amar Shmuel, we all know in Beis Din chayavin ad shemal lahem mutar matem. So Shmuel says the verbiage is Beis Din says mutar matem. This is permitted to you. You are permitted to eat chayla. They have to say it like that. Okay. The Dini Narda Amar Achiyom Lahem Mutarin Atem Lasos. If you notice again, the Dini adds in one word. What's the one word? Lasos. You are permitted to act on this psak. So Dini says saying that it's mutar is not enough. In order for the individual to be shielded from personal liability because they acted based on the psak of Beis Din must have also added in the word lasos, and you are permitted to go ahead and behave based on this psak. Permitted to act based on this psak. So very interesting. The Gemara says, "My time, now what's the reason for that? Why does the Dini add in that word lasos?" So the Dini says, because without lasos, there's a statement of information, or there's a statement of fact, but there's no mandate, or there's no direction from Beis Din which are allowed to act based on this. So therefore, Rabbi requires the word lasos in order for this to be like instruction from Beis Din, which would then mean if Beis Din says mutar, right? Chaylev is mutar atan lasos. You're permitted to go ahead and eat chaylev, or mutar atan lasos. Right, you're allowed to go ahead and eat. Okay, so then Beis Din is questioning and they're giving hora, they're giving instruction. Rav Dini says, halacha l'maisa, that's where if the individual acted on that Beis Din's advice, that Beis Din's psak, ultimately again, the individual would be patur. But according to Rav Dini, if Beis Din would just say, mutar matem, it's mutar, that would not shield the individual from personal liability. Shmuel says, yes, it would. Okay, so let's analyze this. So my time again, what's from Dini's logic? Because Beis Din's psak is only final when number one, they tell you status, and action. When they tell you it's mutter, and you can in fact behave based on this psak, ultimately again that's when based on this psak is complete. So let's analyze this. Let's analyze this. Good. Fine. So good. What's about else? Let's point out Rashi's on both sides over here. So we're gonna right now we're still on the left on the right side, but just notice it's on both sides. So Rabbi, I find another thing. Rabbi says we also now say Rabbi is coming along to support ultimately again Rabbi's position. I find another thing. We also learn this. Because of so it's maybe a lot to learn us today. Let's say this is the case of Zakin Mamre. Zakin Mamre is an individual who is a member of the Beis Din who refuses to yield to the majority. So let's take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Chazar Rashi says, Zakin Mamre Li'ilo, Hora Lasos, the mashma become a mutar atam lasos. Okay, so before we get that, so Zakin Mamre is literally again someone who is outnumbered on the Beis Din, but refuses to yield to the majority. So let's say, so such an individual actually to be executed. Or this translation, this makes sense because if you refuse to yield to the majority, you're undermining the fundamental fabric of the way the judicial system works. That's how a Beis Din works. It works on the majority. So again, the Gemara says, I'm Rabbi, I want to never get back to our Makkas days. Remember Makkas? As Joel says, remember, the Gemara said that even after Beis Din delivers a verdict, the judges in the minority can't go over to the Republican and say, no, this is good, so I'll let you know. I really believe you. But what could I do? I was in the minority. You can't do that. You can't do that. If you're part of the Beis Din, once the majority decides on something, that's the psak, and everyone is in. So Zakin Mamre refuses to yield to the majority. So watch this. Chazal Yiro, so let's say Zakin Mamre goes back to his town. Shana, he continues to teach Valine Tider Shalimit, and he continues to advance the psak that he held before. Pater, ultimately again, he's Pater. In other words, if he comes back to his town and he continues to go ahead and discuss the psak and teach the psak as he believed it, not in line with the way the Beis Din was doing it, he's Pater. You don't execute him. However, Hora Lasos. But if he asks it and he says, Hevra, you can act on this psak, then, what do you see from here? That for Beis Din to give a binding psak, it's not just enough to say mutarin atem, but rather what do they have to say? Mutarin atem lasos. For Beis Din's psak to be a formal psak, they have to give, first of all, again, the psak halacha, and then explicitly indicate you can act based on this halacha. So just remember again, why is this important for us? Our whole discussion is an individual is acting based on the psak of Beis Din, which turns out to be erroneous. So now we're saying, okay, you acted in good faith, you're shielded from personal liability. Rabbi is saying, but it only works if the psak was literally